Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a safe place for leading with your heart. Hey, thanks for being here. You, Me, Empathy is the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective, a collaborative mental health community designed to empower each of us to grow our capacity for empathy, vulnerability, and emotional wayfinding. Just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No one is just a silly boy with a feely heart. You can support the show by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts, following us on social media at Yumi Empathy and Feely Human, and joining the Feely Human Collective community at feelyhuman.co. And now your host, Known Wells.
Hello, Feely Humans. Welcome to another episode of Yumi Empathy. My name is Known Wells, and this is episode 136 on racial trauma and somatic healing with somatic and transformational coach Rebecca-Monique. Rebecca and I talk a lot about trauma and grief in this episode. We talk about her story a little bit, about moving from Africa to the UK when she was a child, and some of the survival techniques that she learned through childhood. And we talk about psychological abuse, and we talk about communicating the why and the suffering we experience as humans when we aren't looking, and why healing is relational and communal. We talk about intergenerational trauma, and as I mentioned, racial trauma, inner child work, the covert forms of racism that persist, the trauma we hold in our bodies, and forgiving ourselves for the pain and trauma we've experienced. It's a very inspirational episode. Rebecca-Monique is so eloquent about this stuff because she does it for a living. Really enjoyed connecting with her. If you aren't following Rebecca-Monique on Instagram, you absolutely should. She's at RBCCMNQ, RBCCMNQ, and that is linked in the show notes for this episode, of course. I hope you enjoy the episode. Before we get to it, though, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for the lovely birthday messages. My birthday was on Saturday, just a couple of days ago, and I had a good day. I went for a 20-mile hike, and it felt good, and I'm 39 now, and if you want to do anything for my birthday, if you feel called to do anything for my birthday, an easy thing to do is leave a rating and review for this podcast. It's easy to do, helps out the show, and it's free. And I'm going to read a new review here from Anna. Anna says, Known does a beautiful job demonstrating how to be an empathy hero by showcasing so many incredible and important stories across a variety of topics that we can all either learn from or relate to. This podcast is centered around vulnerability and authenticity, making the content so incredible and impactful. It has made a great impact in my life, and I'm excited to continue hearing these powerful stories. Thank you, Anna. 5 stars from Anna. Thank you so much for that review. And again, Feely Humans out there, please leave a review. It would make my day, and we're almost at 100 reviews on Apple Podcasts. So let's get to 100 at the very least. Hey, let's get to 150. I think we can do it. There are a lot of you out there that haven't left a review. I feel like a broken record, but it is important, and it's a free way to support the show. Okay, what else do I want to say? I guess I just want to say also thank you to all of you for sort of, being a part of this weird physical health journey I'm experiencing. I've been sharing that I had an MRI recently this past week and an EEG, and there's maybe something going on in my brain, and I may hear this week if there's something going on there. So I've been nervous about it, but I've been sharing openly, and I hope that's been okay. It seems like you guys think it's okay, but I sometimes worry that I'm sharing too much, and you guys will get sick of me. But the reality is, like, I share because it helps me, but I want to be a role model. I want to sort of model vulnerability and not for sympathy, but to show that vulnerability can be this connecting, healing force. So that's what it's about. So thank you for seeing that, and for being here, and for listening to this podcast, and for following Rebecca-Monique on Instagram, and checking her out and listening to this episode and connecting. And thank you. Let's get to the episode. This is episode 136, Racial Trauma and Somatic Healing, with Rebecca-Monique.
Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective. On this show, we explore the struggles, the triumphs, the brights and the darks we face as humans, trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our mental health, our neuroses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight, so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being feely humans. You, Me, Empathy is a safe, friendly space designed to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, I am so grateful to be podcasting again with grief and trauma specialist, somatic and transformational coach, and new Instagram friend, Rebecca-Monique. Hello, Rebecca-Monique.
Hi, Noan. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for being a guest on You, Me, Empathy.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So before we get into your story, we always start the show with an emotional check-in. How are you doing? How's the week been? How are you feeling?
How am I doing? Okay, so rather than going in with a knee-jerk response of "I'm doing great," I am going to check in with myself somatically. I'm feeling tingly, actually, and I think it's kind of the excitement of podcasting with you. I woke up this morning a bit fuzzy-headed, but that's clearing. But all in all, I'm really grateful.
Excellent. I love tingly, and I appreciate you taking a moment to recognize first of all, the difference between just saying like, "Oh, I'm fine," or "I'm great," right? When we hear that question,
Yeah.
And also understanding that we humans all do that, right, from time to time, because sometimes maybe we don't want to engage, or maybe we're not connected to ourselves and our bodies, right? And so thank you for honoring that.
How are you doing?
Thank you. That's very thoughtful of you for asking. I'm doing okay. I've had some over the past month. I have major depressive disorder, and so I've had some lows, some dips, but I'm on the upswing, and actually recently have had some conversations with my CBT, cognitive behavioral therapist, and my psychiatrist about exploring EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
And I connected with an EMDR therapist this week. We got on the phone and set up an appointment for next week. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm a little anxious about it, but I know that there are some things that I want to explore and unpack. And EMDR, I've just heard wonderful things about EMDR. So I'm looking forward to it.
Good.
Yeah. Have you had any experience with EMDR?
Not personally, but I have heard how successful it's been for many people. So it's great to see that you're exploring that route.
Yeah. Yeah, and for the listeners, EMDR is eye movement I can't even say that word, desensitization and reprocessing. And the goal of it, and I think its roots are in like PTSD and exploring sort of traumas, but the way that it tends to work, generally speaking, is it allows you to, if you're triggered by a certain traumatic memory, and when you are triggered, you go back to that memory, and you can't sort of like unshake it. And the idea about EMDR is it allows you to reintegrate those traumatic memories. So next time you maybe think about it, you're not as triggered, and you have the tools to kind of move through it in a maybe patient or mindful way. And so for me specifically, I have this entrenched belief that I don't deserve love or good things or joy or attention, and it sort of informs all that I do. And so that's why I'm going to EMDR, is trying to kind of unpack specifically where those came from and to develop the tools to combat them, because they're false beliefs.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being so open and vulnerable about that, because I think with moving forward with a lot of things, it's the first step is acknowledging what's happening, and then you're kind of able to then seek help, or to once you've kind of identified these are the things that are blocking me, only then can you kind of develop the courage to reach out for help. And
yeah, very well said.
Figure out what the options are that suit you, because not all options are suitable for everyone. EMDR might not be suitable for many people, but it is successful for loads of other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so well said. It's like, you're on a path, right? And if you're looking down, you're not going to know where to go.
Yeah.
Like if your head is in the dirt or whatever, you're not going to know where to go next. And so, yes, like it's so important to recognize what's happening and to check in with yourself and be curious about what's going on. And then, and only then, you're allowed to kind of, okay, what's next? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you doing the work that you do, well, first of all, like, let's, before we get into that, I want to, and this is a question I like to ask my guests, is really to unpack, like, before we get into what you do currently, is to like kind of delve into like who you are as a person and where you came from. Like, so if you could sort of share a seminal moment or two, in your lifetime, whether it's from childhood or young adulthood, a moment or two or three, however many you want to share, that really kind of speak to who you are today, that, when you look back at your life and you're like, that was a moment in time that really stood out as being sort of integral to like developing the sort of framework of who I am now, or speaks to like, the path that led to where you are now.
I think there are many, many moments that actually led to me even doing the work that I do now. So I'll give you a quick run through of my life story so far. So I was born in Sierra Leone in West Africa, and when I was 3, I came over to the UK and I was adopted here. And when I was 8, my adopted mum suffered a heart attack and she passed away. So then I was placed in the care of a few people who weren't particularly nice, and I didn't have great experiences. And then when I was 11, my adopted mum's first cousin became my legal guardian. But very early on, I realized, or it was very clear, that she had psychological problems. And I went through a hell of a lot of psychological and physical abuse in her care. And it got so bad that when I was 17, I made myself homeless. So I was placed in a hostel. I was clinically diagnosed with depression. But I was still doing, I was studying for my A-levels, which is the qualification that you get before you go to university. So I managed to pass my A-levels. I went to university. I graduated in my early 20s. I got married, had a baby. I suffered postnatal depression, was working through a lot of the anxiety that I had. 3 years into my marriage, I divorced. In my late 20s, discovered my birth mother. Also discovered that I had a birth sister who lived just outside of a few miles away from where I live in London. So I had many, many plot twists in my life that definitely led to me having to just completely, unravel who I am. And just completely rebuild who I thought that I was. And yeah, it was I knew that my life had not been in vain, all the things I had been through. I'm currently writing my autobiography. There's a lot to fill. So yeah, it's been a huge journey, but I wanted my story to be something that gave inspiration and hope to others, because I could have gone down so many different paths at so many different points.
Right.
But, I think really kind of understanding that we do really have everything that we need within ourselves to thrive, despite the barriers that we might face, despite the challenges. I knew that my life meant something more than all of the grief and the trauma and the tragedies that I had been through, and that kind of led me to being a coach. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Well, in that nutshell, there's so much to unpack. That's quite a full nutshell. I'm struck by the mindset that you have, which is, recognizing that that within us, and I believe this too, within us, that we have the capacity to sort of get through whatever we need to get through, and to find the resilience that, as humans all, I think, innately can tap into. What can you tell me a little bit about those early experiences, and the experience, because you kind of glossed over, and not glossing over in a bad way, but you bullet pointed some pretty traumatic early life experiences that would render most people pretty pretty distraught and in a place of struggle, right? So can you talk through a little bit about your sort of those experiences, your reaction to losing your adopted mother at 8, what was going on in your mind? How did that feel? How did you cope with that stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, even from adoption, being separated from a birth parent, I think there are psychological effects that you're not even aware of from that alone, that separation and traveling from, a different country. And then when I lost my adopted mom, I was mute for 24 hours because the shock was just so intense that I lost my voice. I didn't even know, there was nothing that could really put into words how I was feeling. I didn't even know how I was feeling. And I think the thing with that is that there's the adults around you also don't know how to support you because they're also going through their grief. And in that way, I felt quite abandoned. When you lose a parent, especially so young, there are so many emotions that come up. There's feelings of rejection and abandonment, and there's a huge level of shame, and even guilt to some extent. So having to deal with that and not really have anyone to turn to talk to about that, the way that I protected myself or defended myself was to just internalize all of that. And I almost froze. I froze in time. That 8-year-old me for so long was frozen. And I suppose that was the way that I was able to preserve the rupturing emotions that were really going on under the surface. It was really tough. And then I suppose going through, again, moving from different homes, you're, trying to find your place in the world. That's incredibly destabilizing. And, going through psychological abuse, because that's the kind of abuse that you don't see, you don't even know it's happening. And when you're so young, when your brain is still developing, these are things that can have huge neurological effects on you later on in life. And you don't even realize that, these things, sometimes they don't show up immediately. They show up decades later. And they inform how we relate to others and our attachment styles and the relationships that we have with different people, not just romantic relationships, but work relationships and friendships. It was, and of course, making myself homeless, that again was really destabilizing, as empowering as it was, because I was finally out of an environment that was so, that I felt so caged in. It was liberating, but it was also a huge shock to the system because, I was out in the big bad world on my own, and, clinically diagnosed with depression. And I was, it felt like trying to pull myself out of this hole that I just couldn't get out of. So, there's loads of, I don't know, it's really difficult to put it into words, but, then when I became a mother myself, I had all these issues around how do I be a mum? I've not had a strong maternal figure in my life. How do I, even hold my child? How do I love my child? And I felt so much guilt for not being able to emotionally connect with my child. And I didn't realize at the time, all of this stuff was, it was my own trauma response. There wasn't anything wrong with me. I wasn't, someone who wasn't able to be warm or I just couldn't access my emotions. And that was my body's way of preserving me for so many years. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, that, thank you for sharing that. And that makes so much sense. I hear again and again, and it was certainly the case for me, early, some traumatic experiences or early pains and stuff. And my response was to shut down and to guard myself as the survival mechanism. Right. And then that becomes, that thing, as you described, it's a thing that helps you get through the thing, the trauma or the pain or whatever. But then when you're on your own, out in the world, it becomes a hindrance. It becomes something that holds you back, because during that hiding, during that protection, you're not accessing the emotions. You're not feeling safe enough to go inward to be curious or explore. You're not feeling safe because, like in your case, like it makes so much sense to me. You didn't feel safe, right? Like you didn't have that safety. And I think safety is so important. And then you get out into the world and you continue with that and you have a child. And, I'd imagine you probably maybe didn't know like how to create that safety for your own kid, because you didn't have the practice. You didn't, you came from a place where it was not safe.
Yeah. And I think that all of these experiences are, I don't know, there's a huge level of shame that come with these experiences. And this shame silences us, like when we think about shame, it kind of takes these two camps. Like we've got the the innate shame, which is really healthy. That's the very normal kind of shame. That's what helps us keeps us humble and keeps our moral compass on check. And then there's a toxic shame, which is what we typically tend to experience. So that's where we, kind of disown ourselves. And that's the shame that cuts so deep to the bone, right? That's what keeps us guarded, because we then start to think that there is something inherently wrong with us. That's where we start thinking, I am at fault for these things that have happened to me, or I am defective and I am not lovable. And that shame isolates us. And then we internalize it. And then when we internalize it, it becomes our identity. So, it's, it affects so many things in terms of how we connect with others, how we view ourselves, how we view our world. It can have such a long-lasting, very damaging, somewhat problematic effect on us.
Yeah. How, you mentioned these early life experiences of yours reflecting upon or impacting relationships. Can you talk about some of that?
So we typically, how we connect with particularly our early caregivers, that affects how the kind of attachment styles that we develop. So there's 4 known attachment styles. So we've got secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and disorganized. So with the ideal one that we would all love to have is secure attachment. That's where we're able to connect with our emotions, understand what our needs are, express our needs, and that's where we're kind of a little bit more, I suppose, balanced in the way that we approach relationships. And then the anxious attachment, normally that's where it's kind of self-explanatory. That's where we yearn to be seen, to be needed. And then we've kind of got, I'm just glossing over these because these are a lot more detailed, but sure. Avoidant is where we typically look away, or we again avoid certain situations. We kind of run away from things, or we shut down. And again, all of these things are protective mechanisms. And then disorganized is kind of a mixture of the anxious and avoidant. But, it affects how we interact with people. So for instance, if we go into a relationship and we have developed an anxious attachment style, we might be really scared that our partner's going to leave us. If we have an avoidant attachment style, we might shut down in arguments and, maybe actually avoid even being in a relationship when we realize that it's going really well. And then disorganized is we see them typically as people who play hot and cold in relationships. 1 minute they're very into you, and then the next minute they're not. So you can kind of see, especially if you're paired with someone who, if you've got someone who's anxious and you're in a relationship if you're anxious and you're in a relationship with someone who's avoidant, you can immediately see how disastrous that could play out. All of these things, if we're not aware that, this is how these are responses to how we learn to relate to individuals early on in our developmental years, we sometimes think that there's something wrong with us. We wonder why we tend to attract certain people, why we respond in certain ways in relationships. And
what attachment style were you in your relationship with your ex-husband?
It's really interesting because attachment styles aren't static. So they could change over time. And they can change depending on the type of relationships that you have. So, you might have you might be avoidant at home and quite anxious at work. The type of relationship that I had, I think I was probably avoidant. But I could definitely see times that I was anxious. So yeah, it's difficult to say. I think the situations, I think I started out in my marriage as anxious, and then I became avoidant over time. Yeah.
Why do you think you became avoidant?
I think my defense mechanisms were kicking in place because from early on, you know, the kind of me, myself, and I mentality of okay, I'm not gonna, you know, be affected by what's going on in our relationship. I'm going to protect myself and pretend I don't care. So yeah, I think that's what happened when I started to realize, okay, certain things are not quite how I imagined that they'd be. Yeah.
There's so much, you know, listening to you talk and share so eloquently about this stuff. I'm reminded of just how much suffering we humans experience when we're not open-hearted, right? Like when we're not, and we talked about it earlier, when we're not willing to look and sort of have the fortitude and curiosity to just look and be curious. Like we can bypass or at least lessen so much suffering by doing that.
I think you made a good point, though. Yeah, you made a good point earlier about the conditions that need to be in place in order for us to even do that. Like we need to feel safe. We need to feel trust for the people that we're, you know, surrounded by, or the people that we confide in. So when people share their stories with me, I mean, I feel so incredibly privileged, so honored that they're sharing those parts of themselves with me, you know, because they're entrusting me to hold that space for them. To hold their grieving heart really delicately, so tenderly, because, you know, the vulnerability that takes and the courage that it takes, and, you know, being able to feel like you're in attunement with someone who is giving you that space of loving presence, to be seen and to be heard and acknowledged, to be validated, to be understood, that is the catalyst for healing. And that's the space, the environment that needs to be cultivated in order for us to even, you know, feel that we can step into that very uncomfortable, challenging place, because we're so used to our defense mechanisms and our protective mechanisms. That's what's familiar to us. So anything other than that is going to feel kind of scary.
Yeah, well said. How did you coming from a place where it didn't always feel safe, right? You know, how did you cultivate that safety for yourself personally?
I think I developed so many practices. When I was in my teens, I had a diary, and my guardian, she found my diary and she used everything inside that diary against me. And then
oh no,
I know. I mean,
that's I mean, don't they know the diary rules? I mean, that's the number one rule about diaries is you don't read their diaries.
Oh gosh. Well, yeah. She didn't get the memo on that, but yeah, I mean, just feeling like my space was not validated. What's the word that I'm looking for?
Honored,
wasn't
respected.
Yeah, it wasn't respected. My space was just not violated. That's the word. My space was violated, and that privacy, that boundary was crossed. And then I ended up internalizing every single thing. So I am very introspective. And I think that, but I had to be very careful about the way that I spoke to myself in my head, the way that I, you know, the scripts that I was running, the dialogue that I was running in my head, because I ended up spending so much time in my head. And it kind of made sense for me because I didn't want to feel. So I was in my head, I wasn't in my body. So I kind of froze all those emotions, and that kind of kept me going. That served me for some time until I realized that actually I needed to connect with myself, to those emotions again. And I knew that it would be difficult because the moment that I did, all of those emotions came rushing to the surface. And, it's kind of like how we, if we think about a splinter that we have and we don't take it out, every time, we brush against that splinter, it's gonna hurt unless we decide, okay, we're going to take it out. And I think that for me, developing somatic practices helped me to just build a greater capacity to just manage those emotions whenever they arise. Things like meditation. The whole point of meditation is not so that we, it's not about meditating when something tragic happens. It's about meditating as a practice so that we can expand our capacity to actually be present when something is challenging, and to actually hold space and be mindful in that moment. So, small practices like that. And I mean, I only started going to therapy in my 30s. So, I mean, I kind of felt like, why did I take so long to to even go to therapy? And the really interesting thing is that my early therapists were all men. And that was, I didn't realize that was actually because I had been wounded by women in my life. So I'd automatically chosen men as my therapists. And it was only when I changed my therapist this year that the lady that I did a consultation with, she said, in order for you to heal, what you need is to be with someone, in a maternal loving presence. And she was absolutely spot on.
Wow.
And it made so much sense when she said it, and it makes so much sense now. But these are the small things that, this is why, as much as I am introspective and I journal daily, there's only so much of that I can do on my own. Healing is relational. Yeah. And you have to, there is such a huge level of healing that comes from communities and, being with others. Again, making sure that space is safe and you can trust them. But there's so many light bulb moments that I've had with my therapist. That's how I kind of started working on myself, and just realizing that actually, when you start to pick up on some of the triggers and the things that rupture you, you kind of think to yourself, okay, there's a reason why this is happening. There's patterns here. Yeah. And that's when you can start to kind of unpick what they are and where they originate from. And that in itself is really liberating, because you're like, okay, it's not me. This is a thing that happened to me that, my body tried to create a way of surviving and protecting me. But now it served me at the time, but now I want to not just be surviving, but I want to thrive. And I want to kind of move away from those responses or reactions.
Right. It's like, it's such a hard thing though. Like I hear you say that, and intellectually you're 100% correct, right? It's somatically, or the body piece of it, or the deep emotional piece of it, is a much harder task.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a task that I struggle with at times. Like, like what I said before, like I intellectually understand that, okay, these false beliefs that I have, these stories these scripts I've been telling myself my whole life. And I, like you, Rebecca-Monique, I, didn't really start going to therapy till I was in my 30s. And I will just give you the grace of like, hey, you were doing the best you could with what you had. And, there's no like, there's no like finish line to like, oh, I went to therapy first. So, give yourself that grace. But I think that I understand intellectually that these stories I tell myself and the stories we tell ourselves are false, right? Or not true, based in lies or whatever. But emotionally, like bodily, like, the somatically, it's such a harder hurdle to overcome.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's because there's so little space. There aren't many spaces in society that allow us to feel. So at work, we're not encouraged to feel. It's all intellectual. It's all about, it's all cognitive.
Right.
And there are, again, with feeling, we only really feel when we are safe. And because there aren't many places that we feel safe. When can we feel? That's why a lot of people only feel in private rather than, in the presence of other people. And, like I was saying, those, we're relational beings, but yeah, I mean, feeling into the body is tricky because sometimes, I mean, we don't even know where to start. We have a feeling that we don't like and we brush it away, we push it down, rather than stopping, realizing, okay, there's something here. Where am I feeling this? What is this that I'm feeling? What's the sensation? How can I describe it? And stay with it and actually follow that sensation, or track it, see how it develops, kind of explore, with curiosity, what is my relationship with this emotion, even if it's really challenging and difficult. And then not feeling like you have to stay with that difficult emotion. It's not, yes, it's good to explore it, but you don't always have to stay, or overstay with that difficult emotion. We can kind of say, okay, I'll be back. And, now we're kind of pals, and I can recognize when it pops up. But again, with emotions, when we think about it, we can, when people do inner child work, that's connected to our emotions. That's our feeling self, right? So our inner child is that person at many different points in our childhood, that froze, that child that was frozen in time, that didn't have needs met, and we don't connect with that person because, again, we've pushed them to the side. We don't even know what triggers them, but if we kind of sit with that child and speak lovingly to that child, we can find out a lot about what happened, how they feel, what makes them feel happy, what makes them feel scared. What does your inner child want to say, right?
Yeah.
So, because our inner child is our emotional self.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
How do, like, I mean, I hear you say that, and I also think about folks, or, I'll just speak for myself, who has, and I think you commented on it before, has a connection to my sort of like past self, or past experiences, and has an understanding. I feel in a way that I need to do some letting go, or allowing it to just be, or maybe it's finding the courage to give my past self more kindness, or what have you. But I feel like in some ways I'm too tied to it. Like I'm, like it's almost like weighing me down, right? Mm-hmm. And I suspect that, it's a matter of just developing the right relationship with it, as opposed to, like it being this maybe like hard thing, but it's like part of my identity, right? And you don't want to shed that, and like, what will I be without that part of my identity, right? Like there's all that sort of anxiety wrapped up in that. And that's the thing that I'm working on. Have you experienced that with clients, like having those sorts of struggles?
As in letting go of
letting go of like the past self, letting go of like, or even just like you were talking about, like giving your inner child like kindness and stuff. Like it's like how do you do that?
Well, there's different inner child practices. So, for instance, our inner child is really connecting with our creative self. So it could be journaling. So there's a style of journaling to connect to your inner child, where, for instance, you might have a question that you want to ask that inner child, and you might write with your, I think it's your left hand, which is the part of the brain that connects to kind of the more childlike creative parts. And then you might ask the question with your right hand, which is the more kind of analytical adult brain. And so you can kind of have a dialogue, an inner child dialogue, in that way, and see just what happens. It could be that you use arts and crafts to kind of let your inner child express what it wants to express. So there's loads of like different ways that we can connect to our inner child, but I think more often than not, it's whenever you feel an emotion, that you can kind of almost have a a symbolic kind of conversation in your head with that child. What do you want to say? What are you feeling right now? What do you need right now? So those kinds of things. It's just kind of, it doesn't have to be. It can be non-intrusive ways that you connect to your inner child. Yeah,
I love that. I recently I'm pals with Jen Pasteloff, and she did this writing workshop recently, and she was talking about like connecting to ourselves and having a more sort of just compassionate view and relationship with our own bodies. And the two things that she said that stuck out to me is telling yourself like over and over again, I love you, I'm listening. Right? I love you, I'm listening. I love that because and I need that because I feel at times, and you know this so well as in the work you do, I want to forget that all of the emotions and all of the mindfulness stuff, all the mind body, like there's no connection between mind and body. Like I want to forget that that's the case, and even though like I know, I hold such anxiety in my stomach, for example, like I have a stomach ache, and then I'm surprised, like, and it always like surprises me. And I need to remind myself that like these things are connected, our bodies are connected to our emotions. And I need to just have a compassionate, loving relationship with both those things. It's just a lot. It's like it's overwhelming sometimes,
Yeah, definitely. I think there's and this is why it's so important. Well, one of the things that you said around I love you, I'm listening, that's so wonderful because it anchors you into the present time. Like you are giving yourself space to just be. And that kind of, when someone says I'm listening, and when they really are listening, actively listening, they're not rushing you. And that's the same as being present. You don't have to rush anything. It's not about striving. It's just about allowing and just letting things flow. So if there's a bit of silence, let that silence be there. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, again, like what you were saying, how do you connect with your body? Like, how do you really anchor yourself into what's going on right now in ways that, by cultivating certain practices that, you don't have to make time for, but that are so simple and can be discreet and non-intrusive to your day. And I think grounding is one of the best practices to where you can really harness your senses, the sound, touch, taste, smell. Simple things like, what is nourishing for me within sight right now? So that could be flowers within your view, or plants, or, if you take a look at the colors in the room that you're in, what colors are catching your eye and, are particularly enriching for you. Or it could be, an item of clothing that you wear or jewelry that you like the feel of. How does it feel against your skin? What memories, good memories, does it kind of bring back to you that are nourishing? It could be Simply pausing and shifting your attention to your feet. If you right now wiggle your toes in your socks or your slippers or your shoes, how does that feel? Like that's so grounding, because you're just being so present. It could be, when you're drinking a hot beverage, how does the glass feel in your hand? How would you describe the shape of the mug? How would you describe the temperature? Or even mindful eating, the taste and the texture of what you're eating, the colors that you see, and just, not rushing. I think these things are ways that we can every day, just connect with ourselves and not be so much in our heads, but also understanding that, yes, there is sometimes it's not good to be too much in your head, but I think connecting embodied self-awareness with intellectual self-awareness creates a whole. It's you kind of can't have one without the other, but finding some sort of balance so that you are able to, bring the two into a really graceful marriage.
Yeah, that's so well said. When you were speaking, I thought about, we have this new rescue dog, and her name's Maddie, and the type of training that we're doing with her is, it's based on this woman, Samantha Johnson, who runs like Pack Life. It's Pack Life LA, I think. And in some of their trainings, and specifically their leash training, they talk about how, you as the human really need to be in touch with where you are emotionally. Really be mindful of what energy are you putting out, right? And a lot of times, like, people will, like if they see an excited dog, right, and they come up to them, they go, "Oh, you're so cute, you're so cool." You're basically rewarding the dog's anxious behavior, right? So, right, and we all do that, and me as a dog lover, I do that too. But like, I'm learning that, like, I need to really, especially her, she's young, she's new to the area, she has some anxiety that I'm picking up on, right? I need to be grounded myself and show her that, like, we're calm, we're good, I'm being mindful of that. And that's been actually a really helpful tool these past couple of weeks. It hasn't even been 2 weeks, but in my own sort of body awareness, it's been pretty neat.
Yeah. I think something that you kind of lightly touched on there as well was boundaries. Like, how do you create boundaries for yourself and maintain them, and if needs be, reinforce those boundaries? So it could be, if you're tired and you don't want to go out, to just simply say that you don't want to go out, or it could be boundaries on social media, or all of these things to help manage our mental and emotional well-being, and teaching people how to treat us. And I think sometimes if we have allowed people to mistreat us, setting those boundaries, especially if you've experienced trauma, or, setting boundaries is really, really difficult. So boundaries is a key one in terms of self-compassion and self-love, and being able to maintain that, because you're saying, my needs matter, I matter, right? So yeah,
they're hard. I struggle with boundaries myself, and I think as a culture at times we have this sense that boundaries are selfish, right? That they're cruel or something. But in fact, the opposite is true.
Yeah. I think anyone who thinks boundaries are selfish they're probably people that benefit from you not having any boundaries. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. What kind of boundaries have you created in your life that have helped and served you?
for my well-being, things like the time that I go to bed, so how much access people have to me and when they have access to me. There's things like when I'm exhausted, to just stop. That's a boundary in itself. Like, instead of saying, okay, I'll just finish this off, just, understand what my body needs. So that is a boundary in itself, recognizing that your body is calling for something and meeting that need. There's boundaries in terms of conversations that I will have and won't have with people. There's things that I will do and won't do. So, do I really want to do something? Do I feel obliged? So I check in on myself. Am I doing this out of obligation or, because I really want to do it? Small little check-ins every now and again are kind of just ways that I can just make sure that I feel aligned with myself and what's authentic to me and what I really want. Because yes, there are situations that you will compromise, but if you continually compromise, you find that you get lost in all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. How have boundaries been as a parent?
Really good. Like, I mean, what do you mean?
I guess I just mean, I'm not a parent myself, but most of my friends have kids, and, kids can push boundaries, right? They can really sort of challenge them, right? They can, really sort of, you can lose yourself, your own identity in your kids, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My son is at the age where he's he's good at negotiating. So sometimes he can he can push some boundaries. But I think I like to give him choice and a lot of autonomy within certain restrictions. And I think that's where we are able to kind of compromise with things. So there doesn't feel like there's constant resistance with some boundaries that I set for him. And I think for me as well, I'm really, I just have very open conversations with him. Like when I'm tired, I say, mummy needs a bit of sleep right now, or a nap. And he respects that. I think when you communicate certain things, you communicate the why. Children are quite understanding. But I think it's when you're not open in your communication and they don't know why things are happening. That's where they can kind of push.
Yeah. That's so, I mean, communicate the why. I mean, that needs to be said again and again and again. Communicate the why. I love that. Because I think about, let's see an example. I think I mentioned it before on this podcast, but when a parent says, just because, right? Like when a kid asks why and they say, just because I'm the parent, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's good, right? You're right. They're not communicating the why.
Yeah. I think it's important to talk about impact with children as well, so they can start to understand cause and effect. And again, that kind of ties into the why with things. Because when you say because I'm the parent, or just because you're basically saying I'm an authority figure, and there isn't actually a reason, but because I'm older than you, because I'm your parent, it still doesn't allow them to. It doesn't give them the tools to be able to navigate the world and communicate with others when as they grow. And I think it just sends the wrong message in terms of authority and power. Rather than accountability and responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah. Well said. So the work you do a lot of work in trauma, right? And looking at trauma and helping people through trauma. A term that I've heard again and again is this, it's called intergenerational trauma. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that is and how that surfaces today in real life?
So it's the intergenerational trauma is basically trauma that has been passed down, not genetically, because that's epigenetic trauma. There's many traumas, but it's environmental traumas that have been passed down through the environments or the situations that you have been placed in. So, for instance, if, I don't know, your mother has had a traumatic event that has caused a huge amount of anxiety, that might then, certain behaviors that you are exposed to might then lead to you, I don't know, having some sort of addiction maybe in your life, because that's the way that you've learned to cope with certain things. It very much depends on, it's not clear cut what you will inherit, if that makes sense, or how that will be passed down. But it's basically a type of trauma that you have had to kind of deal with, a secondary trauma that that you then develop adaptations to survive.
Yeah. Have you done research on like the ACE studies?
I have. I've done my ACE. My ACE score was 7, so that was pretty high. But yeah, there's a lot of things that happen in childhood that, you know, whether it's again neglect, actual physical abuse, many things can affect those kind of what your score would be.
Yeah, I think I took it at some point. I think I was a 5 or a 6. Can't remember, but it's interesting. I'd imagine you've also read The Body Keeps the Score.
I have, yeah.
Oh, I love that book. I love that book so much. It's like it was very eye-opening to me.
Yeah.
So when it comes to intergenerational trauma, what are some of the common things that you see in your clients, for instance?
So addiction, anxiety. There are certain behavioral patterns. So it might be, like emotional stuff. Again, shame comes up, a lot of fear and rage from things that they have had to kind of endure. Behavioral ones like perfectionism, a lot of people pleasing, particularly for people who have had parents who have been alcoholics or just abusive parents. They've kind of lived in, I find that they're in constantly in this kind of state of hypervigilance, or the complete opposite sometimes, quite numbed. Yeah. Again, they might also have developed their own trauma that could lead to physiological effects like high blood pressure, migraines. They might also have digestive problems. And again, psychological problems like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, personality disorder, or even in extreme cases, you've got like sociopathy. There's loads of impacts, loads of effects. Loads of ways that intergenerational trauma can impact an individual. Yeah. And all of these ways of being are so familiar; they're just normal to them, you know. And if they don't address them, they're constantly finding themselves ruptured or activated.
Is there an element in your, when you're working with your clients, of getting your clients to sort of unpack or no, that's not the right word. My dog is sneezing in the background. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how does empathy play a role in that? Because I think that when we think about intergenerational trauma, I have to imagine like part of it is, when I hear, my name is known and I have, my parents have had their own traumas and their parents, right? And part of my healing, right, requires a look back, right? And maybe understanding that, the way they were was informed by their own sort of maybe traumatic experiences and so on and so forth. And there's a certain, at least sympathy there and compassion. Like, how does that play a role in your sort of teaching and understanding of it?
I think it's important to validate a person's experience. Because when we go through this, there is sometimes, sometimes people deny the experience that has happened to them, or they try to protect their parents, or, there's also a huge level of forgiveness. So forgiving themselves and having them realize that, the things that happened to them, they shouldn't have had to go through. It wasn't their responsibility to parent their parent. It wasn't their responsibility to be their emotional support for their parent, or to have gone through whatever abuse that they may have, gone through. And again, like you said, to somehow find something within themselves to acknowledge that their parents were doing the best that they knew how to be. They were living how, the best that they knew how to. So I think that also encouraging, if it's possible, a conversation with their parents, to actually openly discuss the things that happened. Because I think this is, again, silence is this thing that just kind of eats away at us, where, if things aren't, particularly our parents, if they don't acknowledge what they've done, that's a huge level of grief that we go through, that loss of someone not even acknowledging the pain that they've caused us. But yeah, a lot of the self-compassion and understanding, how are we talking to ourselves? What voice are we using? Is it really our voice that we're using when we're talking to ourselves, or is it the voice of our parent? Yeah, I think it depends on the situation, because it's kind of, there's a saying, one stimuli, many responses. Everyone is very different depending on things like the level of trauma that they went through, how quickly that trauma was addressed, whether or not they had access to support after the trauma happened. There are so many, so many different ways.
Yeah, thank you for that. And to add, it's there's so many probably complexities to this, but thinking about, the importance of recognizing that, let's say a certain family, you could have like different emotional responses or different emotional burdens sort of put upon you, and you could be in the same family, right? Like a brother has a different experience than a sister, for instance, or, vice versa. I think those nuances are important to be mindful of as well.
Yeah, trauma sits on a continuum from wounding. So that's the hurts that we experience, or the emotionally painful experiences that we go through, to the incredibly tragic physical attacks that we might experience. So yeah, trauma is so many things. It's you might have a near-death experience, or a vehicle crash, or the death of a loved one, but it's also things like it could be sexual abuse, or neglect, or abandonment, or separation. There are so many things that fit into that spectrum of what trauma is, and no one can dictate to you what trauma is. It's only the person that has experienced it that can say, this was traumatic for me.
Yes, absolutely. What about racial trauma? Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. So when we think about racial trauma, that's a race-based, a form of race-based stress that's typically experienced by, well, not typically, it is experienced by Black, Indigenous people of color. And it's their reaction to dangerous events, whether or not they're real or perceived, of racial discrimination. So it could include things like threats of harm or humiliation or things that are really shaming. So shameful events. It could be secondhand witnessing of racial trauma. It's, when we think about the work that I do when it comes to racial trauma, it's, and the somatic work, there's exploring the lived embodied experiences of Black bodies. Again, we touch on intergenerational trauma, ancestral trauma, epigenetic trauma, systemic discrimination and oppression. There's things like white body supremacy and white privilege, and understanding things like colonialism and its impact on white and Black bodies. And because it's this type of trauma is so historical and cultural and systemic, it's ongoing. So, when we touched on safety, it's really difficult to heal when you are not safe, right? So it's like, how do we heal when society is and continues to be, continues to re-expose or re-traumatize, right? So yeah, and it's also one of those traumas that's so unique because it's both on an individual and collective level. So when you do like somatic work with racial trauma and healing that, it requires a lot of validating experiences, unlearning a lot of the kind of colonial systems of oppression, and fostering ways that we can settle our bodies and healing practices, again, in safe, very trusting spaces. Yeah.
I mean, this one is obviously present of mind for I'm sure for you and for me, considering what's going on in the world right now, all the protests and certainly the murdering of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, all these tragic, awful things happening in the world, and it's fucking awful, is what I'll say. And it makes me endlessly sad to know that you describe, we talk about safety, right, and needing that safety to heal, and the world that we live in. The world that I am complicit in as a white person is not safe for Black people, is not safe for Black, Indigenous people of color. And that is fucked up, plain and simple. And it needs to be remedied. And I mean, of course, that. Rebecca-Monique, but I just, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, there's a lot of the somatic work isn't just for Black bodies. It's considered imperative as well for white bodies to heal their ancestral trauma because it's all connected.
What is the how is the sort of cultural, social situation right now in the UK regarding kind of what's going on in the world right now?
I think it's not, I mean, the racism experienced in Britain is more covert than it is in America. I mean, there's so many things around. I mean, even looking at the education system, there's huge amounts of history that have been the erasure of huge amounts of history from the curriculum that pretty much deny or don't take accountability for slavery in Britain. I think now is, people are starting to realize how, again, this is part of, again, not taking accountability, but because it's so covert here in the UK, I think there's an even greater call for it to kind of be stamped out, and for people to kind of to realize and to expose just how bad it is.
Yeah.
Because that's almost kind of the worst, you know, the one that, I mean, there's not one worse type of racism. Racism is abhorrent, but you know, again, that kind of denial of denying, you know, Black people's experiences, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
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 I didn't articulate it how I wanted to, because I think, you know, I'm also very speechless when it comes to this. It's very, I think I have to kind of feel through it somatically. That is literally my response. My own protective mechanism is just like, I shut down as well. And I'm working through that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I kind of like to think of it, and this is the way I look at the world in general, but it's certainly the way I look at, you know, the practices of empathy and the practices of emotional intelligence and curiosity building. You know, it's really like when and I'll just speak for myself, when I'm looking at this racial trauma, like these covert and overt sort of forms of racism, and now, like, for the first time in my life, like truly like educating myself on the matter. Like, I have to be, just like I have to be in my emotional life, just like I have to be when it comes to my curiosity and sort of looking at the world. I have to be open, and I have to be willing to be uncomfortable, right? And willing to let go of ego, right?
Yeah.
And only doing so, like, I can have an open heart to learn and to educate myself and to find the compassion that I need to, right, enact change and do it, you know, as daily as I can, right? Otherwise, I'm, you know, I just have blinders on, right?
Yeah.
Like, and living that way is, there's no, you can't go anywhere there. It's, you have to like open up in order to change and to be change and to enact change. And with that comes a lot of discomfort, right?
Absolutely.
You know, and that it's the same for this. It's the same for our emotional curiosities. It needs to be a part of the equation.
Yeah. Rebecca-Monique, who is he's a therapist and a somatic experiencing practitioner. He wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands, and he talked about what you just mentioned. So clean pain and dirty pain. So dirty pain is the kind of pain that we kind of skirt around. And then the clean pain is the one that's really difficult, but we go through it. And that's the only way to overcome it, by going through it. There's no other way. And, you know, sitting with that discomfort. And that's the way that we are kind of able to heal, or start to heal and mend racial trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. So I always put a call out on Instagram for questions, and there was one question. I think it was from Lucy. I didn't go back and look, so I apologize if it wasn't. But the question was about, you know, essentially, is the experience of grief in losing a pet equatable to the experience of grief in losing, you know, a friend or a human person? Yeah.
I would say no. I mean, you know, we are connected to, many people are connected to their pets in the same way that they feel, you know, close connection to humans. Only we can kind of, again, like I was saying with trauma and with grief, only we can define the deepness or the level of grief that we're going through. It's not, you know, different because one's human and one's an animal.
Right.
I think any type of grief needs to be deeply felt, and that some people, their pets are, they don't have other humans in their lives, so their pets are, they're incredibly close to their pets, and when a pet dies, basically no, there is no there is no difference.
Yeah. Yeah. No, understood. And I think the most important thing you said, Rebecca-Monique, is that, no one can tell you how to feel your grief. Like however big or small it is, it's yours and it's valid, because you're experiencing a loss, and a loss is a loss, and that's a hard thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't you, well, we'll actually do that in a second. Let's first talk about empathy heroes. We always kind of start wrapping up the show talking about folks in our lives who are, just great empaths. They could be people we know personally. They could be even characters from a novel or a story or a movie we love. I will go first to give you a moment to think about your empathy hero. My empathy hero this week is the aforementioned new rescue puppers named Maddie Mardigan. Her name's Maddie, named after one of my favorite characters from the movie Willow, Mad Mardigan, played by Val Kilmer. I know it's very nerdy, but she's very sweet. I think, like I said before, animals are empathy machines, truly, and they have a way to, if you're open to it, connect you and ground you and allow you the space to be mindful of your own feelings and emotions and anxieties and stuff in the moment. And she's just so sweet and snuggly, and it's also in some ways a little bittersweet, because we also have a 13-and-a-half-year-old black Labrador who, is the love of my life, to be clear. And, we've been with him forever, since he was a puppy. And, in rescuing Maddie, it is a big difference. And it's also, it indicates this, transition, and Scooby's, as much as I like to believe that Scooby will live another 13 and a half years, he will not, because that's not possible. And so it marks like sort of the slowing down of his life and the newness of Maddie's life. And that's bittersweet in a way, but it's also beautiful and the circle of life. Right. So, Maddie is my empathy hero. Yeah.
That's lovely.
Thanks. How about you?
I'm going to pick my son as my empathy hero, because, and of course I'm biased because I'm his mum, but he is, every single day he expresses and demonstrates compassion and consideration and interest and curiosity for people, and their feelings and their perceptions and where they're coming from and their decisions. And I think that level of emotional intelligence is really going to put him in good stead for building stronger, long-lasting relationships when he's older. So yeah, he's my empathy hero.
I love that. And you've had an influence there, obviously, and
I've had some influence, and I think that
you've had some influence. Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And what's your son's name?
He is called Dre Aiden, so I also blessed him with a hyphenated name.
I love it. Dre Aiden. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, Rebecca-Monique, where can people learn more about the work you're doing, connect with you online, all that stuff?
I'm on Instagram, so I'm active on there. So my Instagram handle is RBCCMNQ. So that's my name, Rebecca-Monique, but without the vowels. And then you can also visit my website, which is also rbccmnq.com. And actually, an interesting story about my brand and my logo being my name without the vowels. So it serves two purposes. One is to remind me of all the times that I have silenced myself or not given voice to the parts of me or my journey. And it also represents being able to find the answers in the stillness. So there's a composer that wrote that the beauty in music can be found in between the silences and the notes. So that's also what that represents for me. So, using the wherewithal, your internal resources to find the answers.
That's so lovely. I love that. And I love I was checking out your website yesterday. I love the logo. The logo is fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's bright and colorful. It makes me happy. Well, listeners, all of those links to Rebecca-Monique's Instagram and website will be linked in the show notes for this episode. Rebecca-Monique, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you so much for having me, Nan.
You're very welcome. And to you listeners, as I always say, I'm here, you're here, we're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring pale blue dot. We have each other. It's you, me, empathy.